like you say, if you had engineers and they're building bridges and infrastructure and buildings, you're not going to rush them through a program. Or if I go to some other professional like an attorney or a dentist or anybody that's going to affect my life, I want them to be ready.
Yeah.
And I've had experience in the hospitals. One of my sons had a lot of different operations, and once you get past the care of the surgery or whatever it is, it's really the nurses that are the most important. They're the ones that you interact with. They're the ones that monitor the patients, that make sure they're safe. And why do you think that they're trying to? You said they push them through because they just want to be out. Are there other reasons that they're trying to push them through so quickly and they're not ready? I don't want them to learn on the job. I don't want my pilot to learn on the job.
Right. So across the country right now, we're short about 193,000 registered nurse positions. So that in itself we're suffering across the country with healthcare. We don't have enough nurses. I have a friend of mine who's running a major trauma center and a prestigious trauma center on the East Coast. And he said, Julie, it's really desperate out there because in the last 6 months, I've hired 30 nurses and they're all new grads. I have had not one applicant that has experience. And so that's a little frightening that you're in a critical care area like that with trauma, where life depends on us being able to act quickly. That's one of the things I learned on the helicopter. You've got to act quickly to save patients' lives.
With that in mind, what do you do? What is some of the patient or a patient's family or whoever's in there with them? A lot of it then comes down to communication, because a lot of people in the past have just deferred to the doctor or to the nurse or to the care. And they're like, oh, you're the expert, you know best, all that stuff. And really, it's okay to question. It's okay to question. You should question. But it comes down to communication. How can patients and their families communicate effectively, become their advocates for their own health and their care while they're in the hospital?
I think the first part is to understand you are your own best, how do I say this? You understand you or your family's health better than anybody, right? So you have to understand that you're going to be your best advocate better than anybody else. The other thing I would say is that our healthcare system practices in a authority gradient or a hierarchical structure, which what that authority gradient means is that there's fear in asking the higher medical authority a question or questioning, the care that they may prescribe, or even just asking questions at all. We're in that culture of say, thank you so much, and then be totally confused about what's really going on. So we in healthcare have adopted safety practices from aviation. First, it was simulation. They practiced in the cockpit. And then we thought, oh, that'd be great to teach nurses to do, simulation on a mannequin versus, practice there first and then go out. The other thing we adopted was the checklist. So aviation, it doesn't matter if the pilot's flown 5,000 or 10,000 flights, they use a checklist. So surgery centers or operating rooms have adopted now that surgical checklist because one of the never events that's a major medical mistake that I talk about in the book is called never events. And an example of that is amputating the wrong leg or removing the wrong breast if there's cancer, removing the healthy kidney instead of the diseased kidney. And you're thinking, oh, that wouldn't happen. It still does. So now we've implemented OR checklists, operating room checklists. The other one is the authority gradient, meaning, hey, the pilot in command was in charge and his word goes. So John Nance talks about this in his book, Why Hospitals Should Fly. But I just loved, because it's so reflective of our healthcare situation, that there was a crash, I believe it was in the Canary, not a crash. There was we'll back up just a minute. There was a flight that was grounded because of weather, and everybody was anxious to get home. The pilot, the co-pilot, and all the passengers. When they were finally cleared, which was about 4 or 5 hours later, okay, everybody get back on the plane. We're going to leave now. The weather's cleared up. Tower was talking. The pilot said, understand, clear for takeoff. The co-pilot said, no, I didn't hear clear for takeoff, sir. Can you double check? The pilot said, well, that's what I heard, and we're leaving, we're going. And there was a midair collision and crash because they weren't clear. So after that, now aviation, the co-pilot has just as much say as the pilot in safety. So we need to bring that culture and that ability for conversations between a nurse, a physician, a radiology tech, it doesn't matter. The whole healthcare team should be communicating about how we're going to keep these patients safe and give the best care to our patients.
How does technology come into play for that? Because obviously it makes a lot more sense because they're just people, right? And they can be having a good day, a bad day. They can be distracted. You never know. And they're just people making decisions. So I know that technology is becoming more and more a part of what we do in healthcare. And let's talk a little bit about how different systems or technology is helping with that checklist or a second or a backup or a confirmation.
Technology is wonderful and has come a very long way in the decades since I started into the nursing profession. I would say the caveats for safety would be that the nurse always has to check the patient. If the monitor is showing a rhythm that could be ventricular tachycardia, and that means, something's wrong, we got to go check the patient. It could be artifact, meaning the patient's just moving around. So, or what I've seen, and unfortunately happens, there's alarms on the monitors set for parameters for patient safety. And I know a faculty member that I work with right now has a special needs son and has had several surgeries, and she sits with him at his bedside, and he'll have the alarm, monitor on, and he has some anesthesia reactions, and so he's got respiratory depression that happens a little more frequently or deeper than other patients. But his mom will be sitting at his bedside, and the alarm starts to go off because his respirations have slowed down. The nurse will come in the room and shut the alarm off and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that's bothering you." And she said, "Well, aren't you going to check my son? Because that's what the alarms are for." "Oh, no, he's fine. He's breathing." And so I think in the hurry up mode of not investigating or vigilance when we're surveilling, that's where we can over rely on monitors, or even IV pumps, they can malfunction. And so we always have to, yes, technology is wonderful, but we have to always get back to the patient, put your hands on the patient, and check them. So there are monitors that are great that aren't utilized all throughout the industry. For example, end-tidal CO2 monitoring, which measures exhaled gases, which is carbon dioxide. So one of the stories I talk about in my book is when that wasn't utilized, the patient was receiving opioids for pain after a surgery, and because he was healthy and didn't have any other, what we call comorbidities, he wasn't monitored closely enough. And the number one adverse reaction from opioids is respiratory depression. So he wasn't monitored. He wasn't put on an end-tidal CO2 detector, which could have detected that his breathing rate was too slow and his carbon dioxide levels were rising. And his wife came to visit the next morning and found him dead.